Aaron Philbeck here at Chi Association, head of global content strategy for the association. And I am joined by Elizabeth Burton, an investment strategist at Goldman Sachs, and one of our board members for Chi Association. So, Elizabeth, really excited to have this conversation with you on what it means to become a CIO.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm excited too.
Awesome. Well, you wrote this really interesting paper for Goldman talking about your experience as a CIO sitting in the asset owner seat before coming to Goldman and some of the things to look out for, which I thought it was really interesting to kind of go through maybe the more qualitative elements of investment leadership and the things you need to be watching for as you get into that seat. And I would love for you to just spend a little bit of time talking through a couple of things, maybe starting with that first 100 days concept. And one of the things that you mentioned was that you don't always know the real culture of an organization until you actually get in the seat on day one. Maybe you could just talk through that concept a little bit and things that you look for or strategies that any incoming CIO could take to actually discover that real culture before they actually sit in the seat on day one.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Look, I think a lot of folks, when they get a CIO role for the first time, and this was sort of geared towards that, but it could be multiple times, we're, at least for myself, I came into it initially before I started thinking, like, is there something wrong that I need to change? And I think that's sort of the wrong attitude. Most of the time, these organizations are pretty well run and folks are pretty happy with how they're being run. There are clearly exceptions where there might need to be some upgrades. But I was young when I got the job. I was like 34, 35, and I wanted to make my mark and I wanted to stand out. And I felt a lot of pressure to like have some genius aspect to it. Thankfully, what I did before I started taking the CIO role was I surveyed a lot of my peers and my now peers. At the time, I didn't really know a ton of CIOs other than the ones I reported to. And so I took some time asking them, what should I be doing in my first 100? Some people call it 90-day plan. So a lot of these insights are taken from, and I didn't ask them if I could say their names, so I won't, but the CIOs of large public plans that you know, or that were in those roles and have since retired. So it's a conglomeration of a lot of those ideas. And I think the most important thing that really saved me before I went in was knowing that you need to know the history of why decisions were made in the past, the history of the people on the staff and around the staff. So not just the investment folks, the other folks at the organization in operations or benefits or stakeholders like government or governors, et cetera, and figure out like what they did and didn't like or why they voted for something or not for something. Because a lot of times, I've noticed this since I left, if you just read the public minutes of a fund, they have edited a lot out, right? Because they don't want to get reporters calling and asking, well, why did you say this? So it's a sanitized version. You don't get the full context. You don't get what the feelings were in the meeting or how people were feeling or the work that was put into it. So there's a lot of preparation you have to do before you get there. And it's the people that you may not think about talking to. So on the public pension side, one you should talk to is the consultants who have served this organization before you got there. Hey, can you tell me how the board members feel about private equity? Can you tell me how your first steps into private credit went? Is the team happy with the lineup in public equity? So you got to start there, and then there's many others that I sort of outline in the report.
So one of the things that I think ties in with this, and you've also talked about in this report, is the idea of emotional intelligence and getting to know people. Which, as an investment professional and an industry that's focused on investment professionals, we tend to prioritize the technical expertise to a large degree. And can you manage a portfolio? Can you analyze a deal? Can you underwrite a GP from all those different angles? But we don't really get into the emotional intelligence, the leadership aspect. So, what are some things that you did earlier on in your career when you were sitting in that on the precipice of becoming a CIO to
Right.
try to develop that part of yourself, and advice for people who are trying to do that for themselves as well?
Sure. So I think one thing that I realized before I got there, before I took the CIO role, was that my previous institutions Sometimes people are in roles, not necessarily because they applied for those roles, but maybe that's where they ended up, or maybe they were covering that because there was short staff, or maybe they wanted their foot into the organization, or maybe they thought they wanted to cover one asset class, but now they're really gravitating towards another. So, one thing is it's really important to find out, are the people happy in their current roles? And if they're not, what are they looking for? And most importantly, what you're trying to figure out is what motivates them. So I'll just take the public pension side. I think it's fairly well known that in publicly and in government, you're limited more than in some other type of allocator roles on the compensation part of it. So if the issue is that, well, I want to make 20 million a year, you're not going to be able to solve that for them. So what are the other things that really motivate them? So one example might be, this person might be covering private equity. Well, private equity takes a lot of time going on the road and doing due diligence. Maybe this person has young kids and wants to stay home more often. So, could you reorient them into another role that is more of a home base? Do they have an interest in risk management? That may be something where you don't have to travel as much. So, I don't always love when people say, well, you play wide receiver, so you can also play running back. I think there are skills for different jobs, but you can transition people into learning other skill sets and have coverage in the meantime. And maybe they'll be much more interested in those roles if they feel motivated for that. There's other scenarios where someone might feel like, well, I've been an associate for 5 years. The VP is junior. I really want to move into that role, but like, this is going to take a long time. So you might want to think about other leadership opportunities. For example, do you have a tactical committee or a risk committee or a birthday committee or something? Hopefully it's investment related to give them more of a sense of ownership. But if it's not, is there a community service committee? Things that can give them more of a feel of ownership and seniority to kind of align them with their job. And then the last thing I'll say is, it's not just finding the correct role, it's finding out strengths and weaknesses. So there are different skill sets and different ages of skill sets in organizations, right? So my husband and I always joke, like, I'm a really big fan of Ray Lewis and the Baltimore Ravens, but my husband's a Giants fan and a very big fan of Lawrence Taylor. And he always tells me, you weren't watching Lawrence Taylor when he was playing. And that's why you think all these, why you like Ray Lewis and why you think the linebackers or the quality is different. He's like, but you've seen reruns, you've seen 30 for 30. He's like, I was there. I know the weather that day. I know what the stadium felt like. I knew who was on injured reserve. That's true in investing too, right? So I lived through the GFC, but I didn't live through the dot-com bubble. And there's other sorts of market environments I didn't work in either. So making sure that you're getting the context from multiple perspectives of people who were actually there, knew what it felt like. And that doesn't have to be a time. It could be volatility in one specific asset class, right? So I think giving people credit for what you may have missed, because it's impossible for someone to be an expert in absolutely everything, right?
So I want to pivot a little bit to when you're actually in the seat and you're starting to make some decisions. And there's always that, I guess there's that moment where you go in to a new organization in a leadership role and you're doing the listening tour and trying to understand, again, maybe some of the things you talked about, the motivations, the historical experience, how decisions were made. And to your point, you're trying to make that mark as well. So you're balancing the collaboration versus decisive action and kind of making your mark as a leader. How do you balance the two of those concepts? Because you want to be listening to people, but you also want to make sure that you're moving things forward and not living in the past, to, I guess, to say the least. So how do you balance those two?
Well, I think the first thing is to buy some goodwill, right? Because before you started, there were conversations being had behind your back. What they hope this new person brings to the organization. Like, man, I really hope they fix our operations, or I really hope they cut down on the amount of legal we spend, or I hope this person really pushes hard to add more infrastructure to the portfolio. You have no idea what those conversations are, most likely. So the first thing is you got to find out, like, what are the pain points, what are the bottlenecks, what are the sticking points, what is it that the team wants and that they're not getting, and why are they not getting it? And see if there's any easy wins, right? Like, see if there's something that can be tweaked at the margin that helps out in the short run. Because what you want to do is you want to build some credibility. And I'm not, you got to get the context right. If they want to buy a risk management system, you can't just go out and buy it. You got to find out why. Oh, it costs $2 million. That's why they didn't buy it. So, but one, you want to find a way to buy some instant credibility and to fix some of the sore points that maybe hadn't happened in the past. One easy way to do that is when my first couple of weeks I realized they had meeting fatigue. There's too many meetings. Okay, that's an easy fix. For let's cut down on the number of meetings and find out which ones we really need, right? So I think that that's one way. And then in terms of the priorities you want to accomplish, I found that I had a set when I was interviewing, but then when I got there and really understood the organization, actually wasn't that far off from their priorities. From the outside looking in, it's easy to have some judgment. But when you get in along the history, you actually might find that you're a lot closer. And so the way to get to both priorities is to literally set up a glide path. Okay, in the first 3 months, I'm going to bring you the case for this, and then we'll see how you feel. And then the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, we're going to build the case for this. Let's see how you feel. But to be honest, Aaron, it probably takes months for you really to survey enough people to know if your ideas even really make sense.
Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And one of the other things that you talked about was aside from the people and maybe the processes and stuff, it's also the portfolio to some degree. So whether it's policies or governance, documents, you talked about kind of combing through all of that to make sure that one, you understand the history that's there, but two, like, what do I need to change? So as you've interacted with other CIOs and even in your own seat, are there particular blind spots that you've found that some CIOs have, or things that maybe you learned along the way as you were making some of those initial changes at the IPS or governance document level?
Again, I think a lot of it comes back to history. So obviously you need to read through the IPS and see what is and isn't allowed. But I think there's also maybe some things in the IPS don't need to be there anymore, right? So maybe there, if you're people are busy, um, allocators are really busy. They have a lot on their plate. So maybe they were trying to get around to streamlining the investment policy or to removing an outdated regulation, but they band-aided it so much it's actually working just fine, sort of. But this is the time to go in there and sort of re-underwrite it. Do we need a 40-page policy on why we can or can't invest in this? This leverage restriction from the post GFC area, is that still relevant here? Um, do we, another good one, so sometimes they'll say the number of reports they put out a year or what these reports are, the cadence. Do you still need those reports, or are those creating extra work that you have to do because they're in the policy, but they're actually not really relevant anymore? So going through that, what's really important, as I point out in the 100-day plan, is finding out the file tree. So I say file tree, and I realize it's really dated because we don't really operate off of those sort of things anymore, and we certainly don't print them out. But knowing where all the bodies are buried, for lack of a better term, and having someone help you find that before you arrive on day one, because you can spend hours looking for files. It's a waste of time. So find someone who knows where all these things are, and can help lead you in the right direction. And you probably want to look at past versions too, and find out what sort of the evolution was. Now, again, some of that can be streamlined by just talking to someone who was there. And it may not be the most senior person on your team. And maybe a junior person that's been there for 15, 16, 17 years and has more institutional memory. And so you want to talk to those folks as well. And at least on the public pension side, you probably want to involve some people in IT, in compliance, particularly compliance or ethics, to find out like what is and is not allowed. You probably want to find out about who the important external stakeholders are, and go about it that way.
So, Elizabeth, maybe a final question for you. You talked about building your personal board of trustees
Right.
as you kind of get your peers and you're trying to kind of formulate yourself as a leader. What have been some of the more valuable voices that you've added to that quote unquote board of trustees, your personal board of trustees, and how did you actually seek them out when you did it?
Yeah. So, a couple of things. First of all, when you do get that board, I would highly recommend doing a blind survey of them. Have someone create something for you, and you don't want to know who's responding, and tell them what they think your strengths and weaknesses are. And it's not necessarily so much about the weaknesses; it's actually about the strengths. I think we all want to be known for something. So an example is that I would like people to think I was smart, right? I'm sure you want people to think you're smart. When these surveys came back from me, it was like, it said that, but it also said she's well connected or she has high energy. And I was like, I don't want to be known for being hyper and connected. Like having friends and being hyper is not necessarily what I want on my LinkedIn profile. But what I realized is that's valuable, right? It's valuable for establishing connections. It's valuable for getting introduced to interesting funds. It's valuable for getting feedback and for building your network and helping find people who have already done stuff to not recreate the wheel. And so, one, I would suggest you find out what you're good at because then you want to find out what you're not good at and who you should have on that board to help fill the gaps, right? So, I grew up, or I started my career, I should say, in credit. So I learned equity second. So a good example is I pay more attention to the bond and credit markets than I paid equity. So it was really useful for me to have some mentors who had spent a lot of time on the equity side. Um, and then I was a member of ISRP, the Institutional Society of Risk Professionals. It was important for me to have someone who had spent a lot of time in risk management at a public fund because it just wasn't something that I had done prior to Maryland, actually. And then there's people you do agree with in your financial philosophy or your investment philosophy, and then there's people that you don't agree with. And you want to make sure that there's some of both because, again, we're not always all right. But you want to make sure these people are honest and that they're going to give it to you straight, but that they fill in your gaps and that they might be able to connect you with someone else that can really help you. So one of the most important ones that I added, and I again didn't ask his name, so I'm not going to say who it is, but he was someone that everyone on this call probably know. He worked in public pensions, was a CIO for a very long time. And he would basically say, like, Elizabeth, I know you want to do all these 5 things. Here's like the reasons you should really reconsider. And I pushed back tremendously, but he was like, give me like a year to kind of think about this. And he was right. So you want to find someone that you think, oh, I know how to do this better. I'm young and fresh. But like, they've seen this before in many different versions with many different boards, with many different stakeholders. And you need to give them more credit than you think you do.
Hmm. Well, Elizabeth, I really appreciate you sharing some additional insight, and I thought the piece is fantastic. We'll link to it here in the description. But thanks as always. It's always fun sharing the stage with you, whether it's in person or virtual. So thank you.
You as well. Thanks, Aaron.